August 1944, Berlin, Germany. Inside the dimly lit operations room of the Luftwaffe High Command, cigarette smoke curls above a long oak table. Maps of Europe hang on the walls, peppered with red pins marking Allied bombing raids. A young intelligence officer rushes in, clutching a decoded report from Tokyo. His voice trembles as he addresses General der Jagdflieger Adolf Gulland, the man responsible for Germany's fighter defense. Herr General, the Americans, they have a new bomber. It flies at over 30,000 feet, higher than anything we can reach. Its range, 3,000 miles. Its payload, more than 20,000 pounds. Gulland raises an eyebrow, almost laughing at the absurdity. Nonsense. No aircraft can strike with accuracy from that height. The Americans are exaggerating. But as the officer lays the report on the table, the room falls silent. The codename leaps off the page. Boeing B-29 Superfortress. Cut 2. Thousands of miles away, on dusty runways in India and the Pacific, ground crews sweat under the blazing sun. Colossal silver aircraft, longer than a city bus, wings wider than a football field, rumble to life. Their engines roar like thunder, shaking the earth. A narrator's voice breaks in. The B-29 was no ordinary bomber. It was the most expensive weapons program of the entire war, costing more than even the atomic bomb. And it would change the skies forever.
The Second World War was, in many ways, a war of the skies. By 1943, the world had already witnessed the devastation of strategic bombing. The British Royal Air Force struck by night, Lancasters and Halifaxes pounding German cities under cover of darkness. The U.S. Army Air Forces struck by day, B-17 Flying Fortresses and B-24 Liberators daring to fly in tight formations, braving flak and fighters in broad daylight. But both fleets had limits. The B-17, legendary for its toughness, could carry just 4,800 pounds of bombs across Germany. The B-24, faster and with longer range, still couldn't strike beyond the European continent. When the United States turned its eyes toward Japan, the challenge became clear. Tokyo was nearly 3,000 miles from the nearest Allied base. Neither the B-17 nor the B-24 could make the trip. The solution was born in 1939 on the drawing boards of Boeing engineers. A bomber that could fly above 30,000 feet beyond the reach of most fighters and flak, carry a bomb load 4 times greater than a B-17, cross oceans with a range of 3,250 miles, defend itself with remote-controlled gun turrets guided by advanced analog computers. It was called the B-29 Superfortress. The project's scale was unprecedented. Its price tag, $3 billion, a staggering sum at the time, greater than the entire Manhattan Project to build the atomic bomb. Each plane required 75,000 precision parts and 157,000 man-hours of labor. It was not just a bomber, it was a flying machine of the future. But in Berlin, German planners dismissed the rumors. The Luftwaffe was already straining to counter the B-17 and B-24. The idea of an aircraft flying 10,000 feet higher and still delivering accurate strikes seemed beyond imagination.
In Adolf Galland's words years later, "We were convinced no machine could bomb effectively from such heights. We did not believe the Americans could mass-produce such a monster." Yet, across the Atlantic, America's industrial engines roared to life. Boeing, Bell, and Martin factories were turning out machines the likes of which the world had never seen. And soon, Germany and Japan would realize their disbelief came at a terrible cost. At first, the B-29 was almost a disaster. Its 4 Wright R-3350 engines were temperamental, prone to overheating and catching fire. Crews called them flaming coffins. Entire test flights were lost to engine failures. But America did not abandon the program. Instead, thousands of engineers swarmed the problem. Factories retooled, mechanics redesigned cooling systems, and training programs pushed crews to master the new technology. The B-29 was unlike any bomber before. It featured pressurized cabins so crews could breathe at 30,000 feet, remote-controlled gun turrets, each operated by a gunner using a sight linked to a computing gun sight, a central fire control system allowing gunners to coordinate against enemy aircraft. It was an aircraft designed not just to fly, but to dominate the skies. By the summer of 1944, the first B-29s were deployed to airfields in India and China under the command of General Curtis LeMay. The mission? Strike the Japanese homeland for the first time since Doolittle's daring raid in 1942. The logistics were staggering. Every gallon of fuel, every bomb had to be hauled over the Himalayas, the hump, from India to forward bases in China. For every one B-29 sortie launched, 12 supply missions were needed just to bring in fuel and bombs.
The first raids were disappointing. Weather, mechanical issues, and high-altitude jet streams scattered the formations. Bombs fell far from their targets. Yet the psychological impact was enormous. Japan now knew it was vulnerable. And in Berlin, German intelligence began to hear whispers. An aircraft with the range to cross continents. An aircraft so high our fighters cannot touch it. If such a machine is real, then the war may already be lost. The turning point came with the capture of the Mariana Islands, Saipan, Tinian, and Guam, in the summer of 1944. From these volcanic islands, vast new air bases were built, tailor-made for the B-29. Runways 3 miles long were carved from coral. Entire harbors filled with American ships brought fuel, bombs, and replacement parts. By late 1944, the U.S. could launch hundreds of B-29s directly at Japan, bypassing the impossible logistics of China. It was here that America's full industrial might converged with its strategic vision. Germany had dismissed the B-29 as fantasy. Now it was reality, an airborne fortress that could level entire cities from altitudes the Luftwaffe had never dreamed of. And soon, the world would see its terrible power unleashed.
November 24, 1944. The skies above Tokyo growl with a sound not heard in years. From the new American bases in the Mariana Islands, 111 B-29 Superfortresses thundered toward the Japanese capital. For the first time since the Doolittle raid of 1942, bombs are falling on Tokyo itself. Only this time, not from 16 daring medium bombers, but from a fleet of giants flying at altitudes above 30,000 feet. Japanese fighters clawed desperately upward. The nimble Zero, so feared in 1941, stalls and shudders in the thin air. Anti-aircraft guns blaze from the ground, but their shells burst thousands of feet below the silver formations. A B-29 gunner later recalled, "It was almost like looking down at another world. The flak bursts were black puffs far beneath us. The fighters never seemed able to climb high enough to really threaten us. We felt untouchable." But high-altitude bombing had its challenges. At such heights, the jet stream ripped across Japan at nearly 200 miles per hour, scattering bombs miles from their targets. Early raids caused limited damage, and frustration grew in Washington. Then entered General Curtis LeMay. Hard, cold, and ruthless, LeMay changed tactics. He ordered the B-29s to fly lower, 7,000 feet instead of 30,000, and switch from high explosives to incendiaries. The aim was no longer precision, but annihilation. On the night of March 9 to 10, 1945, the full power of the Superfortress was unleashed. 334 B-29s roared over Tokyo, each carrying loads of jellied gasoline bombs, napalm. The city below, built largely of wood and paper, erupted into an inferno.
Eyewitnesses described a hurricane of fire, flames leaping into the sky, sucking oxygen from the streets. People suffocated in shelters. Entire districts vanished in minutes. By dawn, 16 square miles of Tokyo were reduced to ash. 100,000 civilians were dead. The single deadliest air raid in history, greater even than Hiroshima or Nagasaki.
A stunned Japanese officer wrote in his diary, "It was hell itself. We could do nothing. The Americans flew where they wished, struck when they wished. Our defenses were powerless." In Berlin, German officers studied the reports with disbelief. Their own jet fighter, the Me-262, could climb higher and faster than any propeller aircraft in the world, but it existed in pitiful numbers. The Luftwaffe, starved of fuel and pilots, could not even dream of meeting such an onslaught. The B-29 had done more than drop bombs. It had shattered the illusion that any city, any empire, could remain safe behind distance or defenses. And from that night onward, Japan's fate, and Germany's foreboding sense of their own, was sealed. While B-29s turned Japanese cities into firestorms, their true power lay far behind the front lines and the endless roar of American industry. The B-29 was the most advanced aircraft of the war, but it was also the most expensive. At $3 billion, the program consumed more resources than even the Manhattan Project. Every rivet, every engine, every gun site required a vast army of workers. Factories in Wichita, Omaha, Seattle, and Marietta stretched for miles, their assembly halls so large they seemed like cities under one roof. Boeing, Bell, and Martin divided the work, each producing sections of the bomber that would be shipped by rail and bolted together like pieces of a giant puzzle. One bomber required 75,000 precision parts and 157,000 hours of labor. Inside the Wichita plant alone, more than 40,000 workers, half of them women, labored around the clock. Rosie the Riveter was no longer just a poster. She was on the factory floor, guiding drills, sealing fuselages, and testing hydraulic lines. A worker later recalled, "We knew what we were building. Every bolt we turned, every seam we sealed, it was another nail in Japan's coffin. We weren't just making planes, we were ending the war." The scale was staggering. Between 1943 and 1946, the U.S. produced nearly 4,000 B-29s. At the height of production, a new Superfortress rolled off the line every 2 hours.
Contrast this with Germany. By 1944, Allied bombers were shredding the Reich's factories and oil plants. The Luftwaffe, once the terror of Europe, was crumbling. Fuel shortages grounded squadrons. Experienced pilots were dead or captured. For every German bomber lost, the Reich could barely replace half. For every B-29 lost, America built 3 more. And behind every bomber stood not just workers, but logistics. Entire convoys of Liberty ships ferried fuel, bombs, and spare parts across the Pacific. Engineers carved airfields from coral, some runways stretching 8,500 feet, long enough for the massive wings of the Superfortress. The B-29 was not simply an airplane. It was a symbol of what an industrial democracy could achieve. It embodied the combined strength of farmers, riveters, mechanics, and engineers, each one contributing to a machine that dwarfed anything Germany or Japan could imagine. It was industry weaponized, and it was unstoppable. By 1945, the Axis could no longer deny it. The B-29 was beyond their reach. In Germany, the Luftwaffe was already fighting for its life against waves of B-17s and Lancasters. Reports of the B-29 filtered in from Japan, describing a bomber so high and so fast that it was practically invulnerable. Albert Speer, Hitler's armaments minister, later admitted, "When we heard of the B-29, we knew our chances were finished. Our own long-range bomber projects had collapsed. We could never hope to match such an aircraft in numbers or performance." The Luftwaffe's dream of an America bomber, a plane that could strike New York from Europe, remained just that, a dream. Prototype designs like the Junkers Ju-390 or Messerschmitt Me-264 never reached mass production. Starved of fuel, materials, and time, they were fantasies in a Reich collapsing under Allied bombs. Meanwhile, in Japan, the reality was far worse. By mid-1945, hundreds of B-29s were reducing city after city to rubble. Osaka, Nagoya, Kobe, each burned in turn. By July, half of Japan's urban population was homeless. A Japanese officer grimly confessed, "Our fighters could not reach them. Our guns could not touch them. We were naked beneath their wings." And then came the final hammer blows. In August 1945, 2 lone B-29s, Enola Gay and Boxcar, delivered atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Entire cities vanished in seconds.
It was the culmination of everything the Superfortress represented: range, altitude, payload, and the might of American industry. For Germany, the war was already lost by May 1945. But the reports from Japan confirmed their deepest fear. The United States had built a machine that could wage war from the skies on a scale no dictatorship could ever match. Hitler never lived to see it, but his generals understood. The Reich had gambled that America was too soft, too divided, too industrially weak to sustain a global war. The B-29 proved them catastrophically wrong. In the end, the Superfortress was not just a bomber. It was a verdict. From Berlin to Tokyo, the B-29 Superfortress had begun as a rumor, a machine so advanced that enemy leaders dismissed it as impossible. But in war, disbelief is deadly. The Reich had gambled on short wars, lightning strikes, and technological surprises. Japan had gambled on distance and defense. Both were overwhelmed by something neither dictatorship could match: the sheer, organized power of a democracy in arms. The B-29 was more than an aircraft. It was the embodiment of an industrial giant unleashed. It proved that a nation of free citizens, farmers, welders, riveters, engineers, pilots could outproduce and outfight empires built on tyranny. For every German officer who scoffed, for every Japanese planner who said, "They cannot reach us," the silver wings of the B-29 became the final answer. From 30,000 feet, they carried not just bombs, but the weight of history's verdict. In 1945, Albert Speer admitted with haunting clarity, "The war was decided by American industry. Our disbelief was our destruction." And so the lesson remains. Technology, bravery, and strategy matter, but in the end, it is the strength of a nation's people, its workers, its unity that decides wars. As President Franklin Roosevelt had promised in 1940, before America had even entered the war, "We shall harness the arsenal of democracy." The B-29 Superfortress was the proof. A weapon that flew higher than the Luftwaffe could reach, carried more than the Reich could imagine, and broke the back of an empire that believed itself untouchable. From the ashes of Tokyo and the silence of a defeated Berlin, history delivered its verdict. Never underestimate the power of a free nation when its industry and will are united.